Welcome, everybody. Joe Tarnowski here with ECRM, and I have back with me Alli Ball, principal and owner of Allison Ball Consulting. She works with food and beverage brands to help them succeed at retail. She is also the host of the Food Biz Wiz podcast. Highly recommend everybody to check that out. Lots of great practical information there because Alli is a former buyer as well. So, Allison, thank you so much for joining us. And to kick it off, right, since we're going to be talking about goal setting and reverse engineering goals, I know this question's a little, rudimentary, but what's the importance of setting goals in the first place?
Yeah, well, Happy New Year, Joe. Thanks for having me on here. I'm happy to be back. I want to talk about goals. I'm so excited to talk about goals. I love talking about goals, but let's start with the why, like you said. And it is rudimentary, but I think it's important to start at the beginning. So I've got three reasons why I set goals and why I encourage my clients and retail ready students to set goals. The first one is that we need to know where we're going and where to focus our efforts in our business, right? Like, Joe, I'm sure you see this all the time. That feeling of being overwhelmed and spinning your wheels is so common in our industry, right? If you don't have a goal, you don't know where to focus your efforts. Do you feel like you've got limited time and mental capacity?
I'm a big believer in that. Anything that's going to help me to focus my efforts, because like you said, there's usually, and I'm not alone, it's not me, it's with you, it's with anybody in our industry. There's so much on everybody's plate being able to really, really shape your focus, sharpen your focus, and figure out where you need to put your efforts is going to be a big help.
Totally. It's just about acting with intention, right? There's an analogy that I like to think about when people argue against this and they're like, oh, Alli, well, I'm not sure. I use this visual of being on a soccer field, Joe, and having each day I can kick a soccer ball 6 times. And so which would I rather have 6 soccer balls all lined up on the end line and I give each ball 1 kick a day? Or would I rather have 1 soccer ball kicking it 6 kicks a day to reach that other end line, right? Like, obviously we want to focus and kick 1 soccer ball or a limited number of soccer balls down the field. So
and that's true. You progress. If you're focusing on the one, you make some progression rather than just that one shot and then it's over. So I like that analogy.
Exactly. So we need to think about where we're going and how to focus our efforts, right? So we set goals for that. We also set goals because if we don't set goals, we can't measure our success and we can't identify areas where we can improve. Right. And this, again, seems so obvious, but how many times have you've seen business owners and founders say like, oh, well, like we did pretty well this year, or like we didn't do so well this year, or like whatever it is, but it's a feeling rather than a fact, right? There is nothing that they have quantified about how well they've done or how far off they've missed the mark, and therefore they can't identify what they did well or where they need to improve, right?
And I think where that's really important too is down the road, year over year over year of doing that, you could really start getting a handle on what works, what doesn't work, and how to kind of improve along the way.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important too in business is that like the data doesn't lie, and that we might feel all of these things about our businesses. Like, I think I did really well this year. I feel like I missed the mark this year. But until we look at the numbers, it's just those are just thoughts and feelings in our heads, right?
Yep. The market is the ultimate determinant of whether you were a success or not.
Totally.
And that goes for anything, whether it's sales or whether it's content or, you put stuff out there that you might think is the best thing in the world, and then nobody reads it. And then something else that you put out that, you never expected, and then all of a sudden it blows up. I joke around with our marketing team where sometimes, when we hit a milestone of number of meetings and our virtual sessions during the past year when they were new, I would just write on a piece of paper and put it up like that, and it would get tremendous amount of views versus like something fancy.
Yes.
And so you never
Oh my
know.
gosh. I love that. I love that. You never know, right? Like you never know what's going to work and doesn't. And I feel like one of the things that I've learned over the past 7 years of running my business is this idea that I have to look at the data in order to make business decisions. And then like, certainly, yes, there is something about like trusting your gut and like going with your, what your intuition says. But at the end of the day, the data is really where we can make strategic business decisions. And that's really important as we think about goal setting.
Yeah. I agree. There is that gut feeling is a little bit important. I mean, look at Apple and Steve Jobs, and he created everything with no data because it didn't exist yet. But that's a kind of unique case.
Yes. Yeah. It's. I mean, I do that in my own business. I'm not going to like discredit the founder's intuition, but I will say that the data. After you make that initial leap, you got to look at the data, right?
Yeah, and that steers you.
Yeah. And so I've got one other thing I want to say about goals, about like why we set them and what we think about them before we talk more about this. But Joe, I want to emphasize that at the end of the day, I don't really care whether I hit my goal or not. Or I don't really care whether like my retail ready students hit their goals or not. And that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but when I think about goals, it's much more about the systems and the process that we put in place along the way of trying to reach our goal, that is what really makes the difference in our business, rather than like that end act of hitting the goal itself. So like, let's say somebody listening has a goal of getting 100 new wholesale accounts by the end of June, right? Like in Q1 and Q2. And by that end date, you only had 60 accounts, right? So some folks might be really bummed out that they didn't hit their goal, right? And I would argue that the systems and the procedures that you put in place, all those things that you had to learn and implement on your way to opening those 60 doors, were really the most important part about setting the goal in the first place.
Yep, and that 100 is a big number anyway.
Totally. And like, to be honest, like nothing magic happens between like, your 90th account and your 100th account either. So it's not just like, you wake up on on June 30th, you hit your 100 account and like the world has magically changed.
Yeah.
It's really about the systems that you put in place, the things that you learn along the way of achieving your goal that really are what drive the business forward.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into, the process of reverse engineering your goals. But before we get into that part of it, what are some of the mistakes that people make along the way or in formulating their goals in the first place?
That's a good question. I always like talking about the mistakes because I see the same ones happen over and over again. So one of the ones that I see most commonly is founders focusing on the wrong goals at the wrong time in their business. I'm sure you've seen this too. So like, I had a retail ready student say like, I want to get into Whole Foods in 2020, right? But they didn't have their marketing strategy dialed in. Their branding was still on version 1 in the brown craft bags, right? They didn't have a plan for product discovery in place. And I argued like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to land on Whole Food shelves until we have all of those other pieces in place in your business, because that end goal is not, it's not appropriate at this stage in your business.
You made a great example of that also on your podcast with hiring a PR firm.
Yes.
Could you give that example again? Because that really, really put it in perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so you're referencing Food Biz Wiz podcast number 73, and where we talk about reverse engineering your goals as well. So Joe, I use this example of a student posting in our student community, and they asked, does anybody have a good recommendation for a PR firm? And I was like, okay, like in theory, that's a great question, right? Like that's a wonderful question. And, of course, like we have brands who use PR agencies to their advantage and like really, really grow their business through strategic PR. But I asked like, okay, so like, why? What's the goal behind getting a PR agency at this point? And, we kind of like dug deeper and deeper. And at the end of the day, they said the goal of getting PR is to get more direct to consumer sales, right? So they were really looking for a PR agent who had experience getting in consumer publications like, New York Times, Sunset Magazine, Martha Stewart Living, things like that. But here was the thing, Joe. They didn't have their website set up. They did not have national distribution. They were, I got to tell you, I don't want to give away who it was, but they were a student who makes a refrigerated product in glass jars with a really short shelf life and hadn't figured out the logistics of shipping their product all around the country. And so when we really looked at this PR question, we realized that hiring a PR agency at this stage of their business was, I think I said this, it was like pouring water into a bucket with holes in it, because we were going to drive all this traffic to this mediocre website through this PR agency's wonderful work, and yet there was no way to actually capture revenue from that relationship. So
however,
I see that a lot.
You mentioned the timing wise, it may have been good for them to get a PR firm to help them with the trade media.
Exactly.
To go after buyers so that they can help. So
totally. And one of the things that would have been a more strategic step for them, right? If they wanted, again, like say they wanted to land in Whole Foods in 2021, hiring a PR agency who has specific experience targeting trade publications to help get in front of wholesale buyers would be much more strategic and aligned with where that brand was in their business, because that would help them land on retail shelves, which would, get them further along in their revenue goals. And maybe we can then put the back end places for direct to consumer. And hire a different agency or someone else who can help with that goal at that point.
And again, this is an example of reverse engineering, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Totally. And so one of the things that I think about when, I use this process on myself too in my business, right? So one of the things that I think about, like whether or not I am focusing on the wrong goal in my business, or like if I'm ready to hit some like big goal in my business, I ask myself, if I hit this goal, what would break in my business? And, I'm looking at my own goals for 2021, and the big goal, like that, the top of my board here, I'm pointing over there, top of my board over there says enroll 600 new brands in Retail Ready in 2021. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to do that, Joe, but I've got to ask myself, okay, so if we did that, if we enrolled 600 new students in Retail Ready in 2021, what would break in my business? So it would mean that I would have to ensure that I have new systems in place for supporting the increased students' questions in our private student community. I would probably have to hire another employee to make sure that we're like taking care of people on the back end in the way that we promise them. I would need to make sure that this is so silly, but like my Zoom account allows hundreds of people on our coaching calls, like all of these things, really thinking about what would break in my business and how can I make sure that I fix those things on the back end before I hit my big goal, right?
That's really smart.
So even on like Whole Foods example, so making sure that you did have your marketing plan in place, that you have your promotional calendar set up, that you know how you're going to, open new distribution centers as you get into more regions. Thinking about those things before you put that big goal in place is important.
Before I ask you my next question, just an aside, can you explain what the Retail Ready is because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I want to make sure that the audience knows about that.
Thank you for asking. Sure. So Retail Ready is my online course for producers of packaged products, so food and beverage, who want to grow their wholesale sales and understand how to get on those retail shelves and then how to have high sales once they do. So Joe, I've been teaching this course for over 5 years. We've had over 500 brands take it. Almost closer to 600 at this point. And it's the only way that I work with food and beverage brands at this point. It's awesome. It's such a fun course.
Excellent. Well, we'll have a link to that in the show notes and on the blog and the video as well.
Great. Thank you. So can I talk about 2 other mistakes before we?
Sure. Well, I was going to ask you something related to them. About you have goals, but sometimes people mistake goals with tactics, along the way, and that's something that you've talked about. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm glad that you brought this up, Joe, because I see it a lot, that people don't understand this difference between a goal and a tactic. And it's dangerous when you don't, because when you don't realize the difference here, you underestimate the time, energy, practice, intention that it takes to succeed, right? So you underestimate all the moving parts that it takes to get to that goal. So a goal is that quantifiable, like high level, I was about to call it a project, which makes sense in this context, I think. Mm-hmm. So it is that high level, like I want to achieve this big, aspirational thing in my business or my life or whatever it is. So the tactics then are all of the things, all of the steps, all of the approaches, all of the to-dos that you implement in order to hit your big goal. So to give an example here, that goal might be to increase your wholesale accounts by 30% in 2021, right? Great goal. The tactics that you would use then might be registering for ECRM pitches.
We hope so.
And you're like, yes, please do that. And once they do that, right, Joe, there's a whole bunch of things that they need to do in order to prepare for getting on there and having a successful virtual pitch, right? So that big goal, increasing your wholesale accounts, we then would talk out the tactics, right? ECRM pitches, revamping your sell sheet, understanding placement deals, hiring brand ambassadors, like whatever you want to do. But
and each of these tactics may have tactics, like you just talked about. Yes. If they're going to participate in ECRM, well, they're going to need to prep for it. And you and I listed, you went through the 5 steps towards a perfect virtual pitch in the last interviews, which I'll link to as well. But those would be like sub tactics to get to the tactic of participating, which is, bringing you towards your goal of more wholesale accounts. Totally.
And this is where I say it's really important to recognize the difference between the goals and the tactics, because otherwise it feels, or how should I say it? You really do underestimate how long it's going to take you to reach your goal, because there are so many moving parts. It's like this, almost like a big waterfall of tasks and to-dos that you have to do in order to hit your goal. So once we start talking about this specific process that I go through, Joe, it'll become a little bit more clear why it's so important to differentiate between goals and tactics.
Gotcha. And you also talk a lot about, how success compounds. And I think that's really important, because you're right. I mean, sales for products don't just go, okay, $5,000 worth of sales every month. If you're doing everything right, it should grow more.
Yeah.
And people don't take that into account.
Totally. I have a business coach who I love. And at one point, this was ages ago, but when we first started working together, she showed me her revenue, chart graph thing from her first year in business. And sure enough, it looked like a ski jump, right? It was like, whoa. And I see this happen to Retail Ready students. And I think it's really easy to to forget about this, that our efforts are compounded. Like you said, Joe, they're compounded. And so in the podcast, I actually use this example, which I think is relevant to share here as well, that, often goals are around revenue. Let's be clear. Like I see this a lot in food and beverage, that goals are connected to revenue. And so let's say you've got this goal of $100,000 in revenue in 2021. I think the first thing that founders do is say, okay, we've got 12 months in the year. I want to sell $100,000. $100,000 divided by 12 is 8,333. So I've got to make that much money. I've got to sell that much product every single month. And that's where I get nervous, right? Because I'm like, whoa, Joe, like, say you said that to me, I'd be like, Joe, how are you going to wake up on January 1st and sell $8,000 of product this month if you're starting at zero, right? Mm-hmm. So instead, I really think about this compounded effort and being like, okay, if we want to hit 100K this year, could we do $3,000 a month for the first quarter, and then $6,000 a month for the next quarter, $10,000 for the next quarter, and $14,000 a month for the next quarter? Yeah. I mean, I think that feels so much more doable.
Definitely, and it should be. It should be.
Right.
The more success they have, the more success they get.
Yeah.
But doing that $8,000 right off the bat and keeping that's, that, and you want it to grow. It should be growing, because if it's not growing, then you have a problem. Yeah.
And Joe, one of the things that I see happen too is this, the challenge happens when someone sets the goal of 100K, right? Which I think is a great goal, wonderful goal. Anybody listening can do $100,000 in revenue in their business in 2021, right? Just put some strategy in place. So what happens if you don't realize that the goal or the sales compound over time, and you are focused on selling $8,000 a month starting January 1st, if you don't hit your goal come February 1st, so often I see founders say like, oh, well, it's just not possible for me. I'm already so far off track. I didn't hit $8,000 and I'm supposed to do it every single month this year. I should really adjust my goal down to something that's more achievable. Have you seen this too?
Yeah, and that's way too early. I mean, they don't give themselves enough,
early.
It's not realistic, but the way you outlined it, starting lower and then getting higher down the road makes so much more sense.
Yeah, because if I said to you, like, Joe, if you were going to launch a brand, next week, and I said, okay, you've just got to make $3,000 in sales this month, that feels so much more achievable than $8,000, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then, like you said, it compounds. The more accounts you land, it'll jump up in spikes, not in
Yeah, it is. It's pretty cool to see, right? Like to see, you can see I'm smiling right now because it's really wonderful to see these brands start slowly and kind of like inch their way. And then all of a sudden it's just like, whoo, exponentially compounding. And it's really
critical mass. They hit that critical mass and then all of a sudden everything just explodes.
I mean, I'm going to be honest that it can be painful to like get to that point. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. But when it happens, it's really cool to see.
Well, and that's a great segue into the next area, which is, reverse engineering your goals. Because like you said, a lot of things can go wrong along the way. But if you reverse engineer it, take into account all those things. And I was always a big fan of that term reverse engineering, especially on the content side, because if I'm creating some content for somebody, that's one of the first things I ask is, what do you want this to accomplish? Yeah. And then I back out from there. And sometimes their goals, there could be different goals. Maybe they want to drive traffic to something. Maybe they just want something for thought leadership. It all depends, but that's my starting point. And then I work back, and it just helps keep you focused along the way. So, talk about reverse engineering the goals. How do you do it?
Yeah. Okay. So I do this process because I am going to admit on air for you, Joe, that like the first couple of years of my business, I wasn't hitting my goals, or I would start into them and kind of get distracted and go in another direction. And, I would sit down and reflect and be like, what the heck? Like, why am I not why am I not doing what I want to be doing? Why am I not like achieving these things, or at least like putting these systems in place along the way to like get me closer to these goals? And I realized it was because, like you said, I wasn't using this process of identifying the goal and reverse engineering from there. So we start with the end goal in mind, and then we outline how we are going to achieve it. So again, like I know this sounds really simple and really straightforward, but Joe, I've seen hundreds of retail ready students meet their goals, and I've seen hundreds of retail ready students not meet their goals. And the ones who use this process or a similar process, right? It doesn't have to be my process, but who use a process to work on their goals are the ones who achieve them, right? The ones who just set the goal, maybe on January 1st, they set the goals for the year and they don't have a process for working on them, are the ones who felt overwhelmed and scattered and ultimately were just winging it in their business, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here are the steps. I'll talk them out and then we can go into detail on each one. So first up, you identify the goal, obviously. We set a timeline for that goal. We brainstorm those tactics in order to reach the goal. We identify 3 tactics that we are going to commit to get us closer to that goal. And then we bullet point out the steps that we need to implement each of those tactics. So all in all, I think this process should take you no more than 2 hours. How do you feel about that, Joe?
That's 2 hours well spent. It kind of reminds me of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Successful people.
Yeah. When he talks about begin with the end in mind, right? Kind of know what do you want people talking about you on your deathbed? And then you work back from there. Obviously, we don't have to go that far, for this purpose, but still, it helps you put things in perspective and helps to sharpen your focus, because the one thing that I've seen more than anything is personally the ability to focus and put processes in place to focus, whatever those are, has had a dramatic impact on what I can get done for me. And I know, it goes the same for everybody, because we all have the same amount of hours in the day, in the week, in the year. It's how we use them. In fact, I was reading one of the books that I read a little while ago was from Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. And it's called On the Shortness of Life. And that's one of the things that he talks about. One of the sayings is life is long if you know how to use it. And, you have people get this much time, they get X amount of time. Some people accomplish amazing things in that time. The others don't do anything. And when you analyze and see what each of those people did, they used the same amount of hours. It's just they made a better use of it.
Absolutely. You are speaking my language, because I am all about working in your zone of genius and thinking about how can I stay so acutely focused on one thing at a time, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as we get into these steps. But Joe, I'm going to go off script and ask you, have you read Michael Hyatt's Free to Focus book?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh.
I'll add it to my list.
You have to add it to your list, because I think you would agree with what he talks about. And it's really this idea of working on the right things in your business. Michael Hyatt is a leadership coach. He lives in Nashville, and he's got a podcast as well. And I just find that his teachings are really spot on at least for me and like where I am in my business. Yeah, no,
I'll definitely check that out. And I'll add a couple more for our audience's reading list. Is that one I'm going to add to mine personally. Also, the one thing, I mentioned it to you before we started. And so that one's an awesome one for productivity and focus. And then there's another one called Indistractable.
Okay, I haven't read that.
And that one is, I'll send you the links for both of those, and I'll post them in here. And I'll find a link for the book that you mentioned.
Free to Focus.
Everybody can check it out. But I devour those books, and I try to implement. And what is amazing to me is that the steps are not difficult to achieve it in theory. But
I know.
You know,
You see, I'm shaking my head here. I'm like, I know, Joe.
The application of those steps, and that's where the processes come into play, when you have to make it a part of your routine. Routines have really changed the way I do everything. Everything from my morning to the afternoon, I have a set routine.
Me too.
Literally down to the minute. And at risk of boring people, I get up in the morning, the first thing I do, cup of coffee, and I journal for two pages in my journal.
Too.
So I've been doing it.
Journal.
Yeah. So first thing I do, been doing that since 1994. I have a 100 or more notebooks in my cabinet. So that's first thing. As soon as I'm done with that, do my workout of the day, whatever it is. Then as soon as I'm done with that, shower, end my shower with a 3-minute cold water immersion. Yep. And then I start my day. And then even my work day is breaking up into main components. The first part of my day, I try to leave it as blank as possible. And that's my dedicated content creation time, whether it's writing or video editing, whatever. And then after that is calls, meetings, administrative, you know, because I'm more focused and I have more of that energy to focus in the mornings. And that, you know, so that's the routine that I set, and it simplifies things so much, and it makes me more get out of time. What about you?
Well, my routine is actually pretty similar to yours, Joe. So I get up, I make my coffee, I do my journal, I do a 5-minute meditation after my journal, and then I walk my dog. That has to be part of the morning routine. You know, on my heels. And I really like that because it gets me outside for at least, you know, we usually go on about a 20-minute walk. I come back in, I check in with my team on Slack. That is before I open my email, before I get into work, I do my Slack channels, I do my Retail Ready student group, and then I open my email. And usually that gets me to about 10 a.m. Take a break for a workout. Midday workout break.
I'm a morning workout person. If I don't do it in the morning, I won't get it. But
I'm like, I need to check in on Slack before I can do my workout, because otherwise it's, you know, it's in my brain here. And then typically, Joe, I spend my afternoons doing content creation, writing, and training. And so for me, it's really, I think you identified something really, really key here, is that figuring out what time of day your brain is the best at specific tasks, right? So like I can write all afternoon long, but if I try to write at 9 o'clock in the morning before I've processed my Slack channels and my emails, like my brain is just itching to do that other thing. So I too love the idea of routine. And then at the end of the day, I do a workday shutdown ritual where I write my key 3 things that I'm going to accomplish the next day. And I, again, like check out of email and Slack and like shut down for the day.
Yeah. And then when you shut down. And that's the other part of it is that balance, you know.
Totally.
One of the things, and I did a blog post on LinkedIn about this called boundaries, you know, how to maintain work-life balance in a remote world, because a lot of people have been thrust into this remote world and they don't have the luxury of, like, I've been working remote for years, have my own office in my apartment. Most people, their living space is their workspace. So it's hard to kind of, you know, so setting those boundaries, you know, is so important. And then even when something comes up, the other thing I do is time blocking, which is in the one thing and the other book, in the Distractable, which calls it time boxing. But basically, okay, these 3 hours of content, this, you know, so if I come up with, the biggest mistake a lot of people make is, okay, they're on their me time, not the work time, and they come up, you know, they remember something that they got to do, and they run right to their computer. But instead, what I do is I'll leave a little area open on my calendar as for a calendar dump. So anything that I come up with, if I'm reading a book and something comes up, I used to run to my computer and do it. Now I'll throw it on the calendar in that assigned time and say this, and then it's off my mind and you're free again. So
I love this.
Find a way to use that time.
I feel like you and I have very similar theories on time management.
It sounds like it, except you're a night writer and I'm a morning writer.
Exactly. I love it. And, you know, it's really interesting. And then I'll get back to goals, I promise. But it's really interesting because so often my retail ready students, so we have a module in retail ready called Alli's Art of Organization, and it's where I really talk about like setting up your ideal week and thinking about like that time blocking and where you're going to do your skills that only you can do in your business and things like that. But when I talk about the startup and the shutdown ritual, people really think about, or I get a lot of pushback where people are like, I don't have time to do that, Alli. Like, I can't add 2 more tasks to my day every single day. And then they're astonished when I tell them that like my startup and my shutdown ritual take about 5 minutes, 10 minutes if I like really get in the weeds with something like in a Slack channel. But when I do that, when I bookend my day, you're right, Joe, it just allows me to have that end to in the evening. It's that end, and I can shut my computer and I can go pay attention to my husband and my dog and like all of the other things that I want to do in life that isn't, work that's sitting up here in the brain all night long.
And what people forget is that, or don't realize, the whole burning the candle at both ends and working 24/7 is old school. You have even people like Gary Vaynerchuk, Casey Neistat, some of these big entrepreneurs, the sharks and all that. They're big believers, big proponents of sleep, getting enough sleep and being able to turn off, because there's so much, and you've probably read about this because you're reading the same type of books that I am, about how much creative stuff goes on in the background in your brain while you're on that off time, that wandering, mind wandering, default network mode of your brain. And that makes you even more productive when you're focused the next day. Yeah. So it's actually that inactivity is really helping in terms of productivity, even for a really busy entrepreneur.
Totally. I mean, I know myself when I'm working on like really deep things in my business, like I am exhausted at the end of the day. I'm so mentally exhausted. Even if it's just, being in front of a computer all day, but you're working on big things in your business, that rest and recovery is so, so vital. And Joe, I want to address one thing that I think some of your listeners might be thinking right now, which is like, okay, Alli, okay, Joe, like you don't have a packaged product. You don't understand what it's like to be pulled in a million different directions. Like you don't get it. It's different. And I want to say that it has taken me 7 years of my business to get to this place where I've got a journal practice, a meditation practice, a startup and shutdown practice. Sometimes I am still working those 70-hour work weeks. This is just
stuff comes up. I mean, stuff does come up. This is just in general.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, it has taken me a long time to figure out what works best for me. And I would just encourage your listeners, Joe, to like start small, right? Like, can you journal for 2 minutes in the morning? Can you write a to-do list that takes you 60 seconds to do at the end of your day? Like, what are those small things that you can do that will get you closer to working your ideal work week?
Yeah. And then the more routines you build in, the more it prevents you from having to use your energy to make those decisions. It helps you avoid decisions fatigue. Like, for example, I have about a dozen black t-shirts. So when I get up in the morning, that's one less decision I have to make. And, you add, and the working out, I don't have to motivate myself to work out in the morning. Now it's such an ingrained part of the routine. I just do it. Because if you have to fight with yourself to journal, to work out, to, do whatever you're doing in the morning, that's eating up valuable energy, focus energy that can be applied to your main business.
Totally. So I'm hoping, here's my hope from this tangent that we went on, Joe. I'm hoping that some people will set the goal of getting their ideal work week and their routines in place for 2021.
Yeah, this is becoming a part self-help.
Totally. It relates to the goal setting and all that. It totally does. Yeah. It totally does. So let's talk about those steps. So the first one was identifying the goal, right? And I want to let's use that example that that we said at the beginning was, I want to open 100 new wholesale accounts in 2021. I think I said by June, the end of June. So the first step is identifying the goal, right? Very clear. It's, I'm sure we've all heard about SMART goals at this point, but yes, it's specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time related. We then set the timeline for that goal. So in that example, I said, by the end of June, I want to open 100 accounts. And I would argue quarterly goals are more effective. I see quarterly goals more effective for my retail ready students, more effective for myself personally. Do you do quarterly goals, Joe, or what's your timeline?
I kind of mix them in. I have long-term goals, and then I'll break them down to what I can do, quarterly, and then even monthly. But this way you're looking the long-term keeps you focused on the path. And then all of the other ones give you kind of a measurement as to how you're progressing towards that. Yeah,
exactly. Or even like we said with that $100,000 goal, if that's your annual goal, we broke it down by quarters, realizing increases over time. So we've got our goal, we've got our timeline, and now this is the part that I think is really fun and creative. I have people set a timer for 10 minutes, literally like set it on your phone, Joe, and brainstorm all of the tactics that you might use to reach your goal, right? And so I like using a timer because we all know it can just like go on and on. Also, it makes it feel, at least for me, it makes it feel less intimidating, right? I'm like, I can do anything for 10 minutes, pretty much anything for 10 minutes.
And it gives you a little bit of a sense of urgency, which kind of helps. It's one of those constraints that helps creativity.
Totally. I always do it with an old school pen and paper. I just find like that is really helpful for me. Just like, almost like when I was in elementary school, we would do like the hot pen thing where like you couldn't stop writing for 10 minutes. Like, that's what it feels like when I do my brainstorm tactic dump. Then from there, well, let's talk about those tactics for a second. So if we said our goal was 100 new accounts, those tactics, again, Joe, are the things that we talked about in the intro. The ECRM pitches, the sell sheet, the new photography, the promotional calendar, the demo strategy. All of those things are going to go on your brainstormed list. I also like the idea of having this list because it means at this stage of brainstorming, it's just a brainstorm. We're not committing to doing these things. We are just throwing out all of the ideas on paper, like what could we possibly do? From there, when our timer goes off, I typically like to walk away and leave it for 24 hours because, like you said, Joe, I'm going to be in the shower or on a dog walk or, at the grocery store and another thing's going to pop into my brain, right?
It's so important you mentioned that. Because that's exactly what happens. And I actively work that into my content process where I may put together all my notes, review my notes, then I'll sleep on it.
Yes.
Obviously, if I have the time, but I plan accordingly, so I do. And then this way in the morning when I start again, new stuff has popped in or connections were made that didn't exist before. And the brain does that. Again, if you're getting adequate sleep, and that's a whole nother thing we could talk about, but we won't get into. But, I schedule my sleep too. So if you're getting adequate sleep, those things work in the background. So you review those tactics that you created. And then, like you said, the next morning, new stuff or new connections will be made. It happens to me all the time when I plan it that way. So that's a great recommendation.
So then, ideally the next day or whatever, later in your week, you come back to your list. And this is the really important step, Joe, where you identify from your massive list the top 3 tactics that you are going to focus on in order to hit your big goal. So I always think like, what is the clearest path that I can take here to hit my big goal? Like, what is the easiest thing that I can do here that is going to allow me to hit my big goal? And like I said 3, Joe, you and I were talking offline. You said 1 big thing here.
I mean, the whole point is focus though.
Yes.
And so, get rid of the other stuff.
Right. So I'm glad you said that. That is so important. One of the skills that I find so valuable for business owners is the ability to say no
Mhm.
in their business, to say no to anything that is not aligned with their goals, right? It's hard to do. It's a
I would
practice.
almost argue it is. It's very difficult, but I would almost argue that that's one of the most important skills to have as an entrepreneur because you don't have any rules. I mean, it's your business.
Yeah.
You can go in so many different directions that if you can't really decide, I got to focus on X, Y, and Z, and anything that's not that will be secondary or has to be pushed aside. And that goes for you dedicated your time to something or efforts or resources.
Yeah.
So I think that's such a crucial part of this whole thing that is very overlooked by people.
Totally. I have a whole podcast episode on how to say no to achieve more in your business. And it's so vital. And I really come at it from this perspective of, it's not selfish. It's not that you are disinterested in other people and other people's projects, but you have to identify what you need to do to protect your time and your ability to hit your goals, which ultimately frees you up to spend more time with friends and family than do the things that you want to do in your life.
Yeah, and it's not that the things you'll be throwing to the side are bad things.
No.
They're just not the critical things for that goal.
Right. And so that's important that you say that too, because when I look at that tactic list, right, you might have a tactic list that's 2 pages long, and I'm going to guess 95% of what you brainstormed is probably a pretty good idea to help you get closer to your goal. And so you can keep that list, obviously come back to that list, but you want to identify what are 3 things that I can do right now, this quarter, like whatever that timeline is for your goal, that is going to help you move the needle towards that big goal of yours. Mm-hmm. So once you identify those 3 things, Joe, you're going to commit to those things, right? And that you are going to be laser focused on those 3 things. And so the final step here is really bullet pointing out all of the sub steps that you need to take in order to achieve those 3 things that get you closer to your goal. And that's where at the beginning we were saying, like, let's say one of the tactics that you identified is doing an ECRM pitch. You would probably bullet point out, listen to Alli and Joe's podcast on the 5 steps of a successful virtual pitch. Make sure my sell sheet is dialed in. Get new photography for my sell sheet. You see they're all connected. This is where it can feel overwhelming, but bullet pointing it out really makes that path much more clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because just because you identified 3 major items doesn't mean it's only 3 things. There's a lot of those sub things within each of those 3. Yeah. And that's the thing, is if they picked 10, they'd be overwhelmed. But 3, even with all the sub tactics that are within it, it's still something that is achievable.
Totally. So at the end of the day, right, like we set these big ambitious goals at the beginning. Ambitious if you want, you just set your goals, right? You break it down into a manageable time frame and a manageable achievement, something that you think you can achieve, and you recognize that you're going to grow with time. We brain dump all of those tactics, all of those things that are going to help us get closer to the goal, and then we narrow down that list to the 3 things that we can commit to doing to help us move forward, and we bullet point those out. So, Joe, it's a lot, but I know that this exercise helps my retail ready students, helps myself. It sounds like it helps you really achieve goals or get pretty close to achieving goals every time.
The more work you put into it on the front end, the easier it will be throughout, the whole process. Yeah,
you draw your own roadmap, which is so key. You said something a few minutes ago, Joe, where it's, we're entrepreneurs, we're founders, we have no rules, we can do whatever the heck we want. So no one's
blessing and a curse.
Exactly, it is a blessing and a curse, but no one's going to draw this roadmap for you. So it's so important that you as the founder take the time to do it for yourself and your business.
Yep. Definitely makes sense. So I know you like to summarize everything and wrap it up at the end. So
Yes.
you want to take us through a brief summary to wrap things up?
Yes, sure. I would love to do that. Okay. So here's what we talked about today. We talked about why we set goals in the first place. I really come back to this idea that we set goals so that we know where to focus in our business and we know what systems and procedures to put in place in order to get closer to the end results. We talked about the mistakes that happen when people put goals or start thinking about goals. Joe, I think the key takeaway there for me over and over again is don't set the wrong goal in your business. Don't set a goal before you're ready to achieve it, right? If that makes sense.
Yep.
We talked through that process of reverse engineering your goals, which is, for me, the key is really creating that roadmap in order to hit what you want in your business. This idea that we take that big goal and we've got to be very intentional about the steps we're going to take and what we're going to say yes to, and maybe more importantly, what we're going to say no to as we work towards those goals. How's that feel?
That's excellent. And you put it nice and succinct and quick. No, that was great. That was great. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to join your Retail Ready, or if they want to find your Facebook group and all that?
Great. Thank you for asking. So I've got two things to talk about here. So of course, you can always find me on my website, foodbizwiz.com. But we are doing a free 5-day workshop, Joe, starting January 11th, Monday, January 11th. It's called Brand Camp. I have run it a whole bunch of times. It is for food and beverage founders who are looking to increase their sales in 2021. And I've got 5 days of free content. Joe, it's 10 minutes a day. That's it, because I know how busy everybody is. And we're going to talk about all things related to natural products industry in 2021. So e-commerce,
I'm going to check that out.
You should. It's gosh, it is so fun. And I will tell you, seeing the progress that people make in just 10 minutes a day when they actually focus is really remarkable, Joe. So that's you can find that at foodbizwiz.com as well.
Excellent. And you have a Facebook group too. And
Yeah,
you're on Instagram.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for doing my promo for me, Joe. Facebook is Allison Ball Consulting, and Instagram is It's Alli Ball. Instagram is definitely the place where I spend the most time. So find me there.
Awesome. And now everybody's reading homework is Free to Focus,
Yep.
The One Thing, and Indistractable.
Yes. I can't wait to dive into those. That's going to be fun.
So I'll have links to all of this stuff in the show notes and the blog post and all that. And Alli, thank you again. I think we're going to have to do a podcast on books,
Yes.
Our favorite books. And
I've got a few more. Yep.
there's a few spin-off ideas that I got from just talking to you now. But thank you so much again. And also we're going to be doing some webcasts in 2021. These are going to be joint webcasts between ECRM, Range Me, and Alli Ball. So we'll be sharing more details with those as we develop it. We haven't really kicked that off yet, but it's going to happen. So, but again, Alli, thank you so much. This has been awesome and great information.
My pleasure, Joe. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Thanks.